This is Steve Albert, and I'm the president of Allstate Appraisal, and this is part 2 of a 2-part series on third-party oversight. Today we're focusing on what a lender's expectations of their AMCs should be and how to ensure those expectations are being met consistently. For the callers today not familiar with Allstate, this is our 5th decade in business, and I've been here for 27 of those years. While changes have always been part of our landscape in this industry, today staying on top of these changes requires full-time attention, full-time compliance staff. Conducting these webinars is just one of the many ways we work to stay sharp and at the same time hopefully provide each of you some useful information. Towards the end of this presentation, we'll address any questions you may submit to us during the call, and of course we'll follow up with everybody after this webinar with an email that will include the Q&A. On the call with me today is Scott Sparks. He is our National Chief Residential Appraiser. Scott works in conjunction with our quality control teams and our compliance teams here each day to help ensure that we are providing our clients high quality and compliant valuation and appraisal review services each day. With 39 states and counting currently requiring AMCs to apply and register to work in their states and then abide by their individual rules, Scott's background and as a result his insight as a former chief appraiser for a top 15 national lender prior to working here has been very, very helpful to us. Today Scott's going to talk about what lenders must demand of their AMCs if they hope to get assistance in staying compliant each day in this landscape. As I've stated in prior webinars that we've conducted, there are currently roughly 500 companies identifying themselves as AMCs across the country right now. Most of them are new or nearly new. Today's webinar should be helpful to those callers hoping to be able to differentiate between the good and the not so good. That being said, I'm introducing Scott Sparks, who will pick it up from here. Scott?
Thanks, Steve. And again, thanks everybody for joining. I know how busy your days are. We got a lot to go through today, so we will certainly try not to rush through it, but get through it quickly. And Steve, if you see that I'm missing something that you think is important, feel free to jump in because I don't want to miss anything while we try to squeeze this in within 30 minutes. So
I sure will.
Move into our first slide here. Okay, so we got, so once you send an AMC your appraisal assignment, okay, so basically the first thing we're going to go over is how does your AMC choose the appraiser. And this is very important because your regulators, your auditors are going to come in and are going to ask you, how do you know that your appraisers, or that your AMC is choosing the right appraiser? So the first thing that an AMC is going to do is they're going to obviously fill their panel with hopefully high quality appraisers. That starts with the application. So most of your AMCs will have an application. Some of the questions we'll have noted here below are the licensure level. So are they a certified appraiser? Are they just licensed? Are they a general appraiser? And then the experience. How many years have they been appraising? Some lenders like to have a minimum of 3 or 5 years. So that's an important piece of the application is to find out how much experience the appraiser has in appraising. And then another question would be, has the appraiser ever been disciplined by a state board or had any errors and omission insurance claims? Those are questions that should always be on an application. And then, of course, where does that appraiser have geographic competence? Where do they feel comfortable doing assignments? Have they done them there before? Are they market competent to complete that assignment? And then another important thing is, not only do they have the geographic competence, but do they have the assignment competence? What types of appraisals have they been doing appraisals on? Or are they just your standard single families, your cookie cutter homes, or do they have some of the custom and complex appraisals in their background and history? Have they done multifamilies? Have they done condominiums? These are all kinds of things that your vendor manager is going to want to know as he onboards appraisers to make sure that the lender is getting the most qualified appraiser to do their appraisal. So moving on to the next page, E&O insurance. Every lender that I've experienced with requires that an appraiser carry a certain level of E&O insurance, and that can range from anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000, maybe upwards of $1 million plus if needed, depending on the amount of loans and the type of loans that a particular lender may be doing. So a question is going to be, how much E&O insurance do they have? One rule of thumb for your AMCs is to make sure every lender has, like I said before, every lender may require a different level of E&O insurance, but I would suggest if you're going to use your panel for all your lender, or your AMC is going to use them for multiple lenders, that they require that the lender that requires the highest and most of your appraisers follow through with that, so they're not in violation of using an appraiser that doesn't have the correct amount of insurance for a particular lender. So moving on to the next slide. This is a hot topic today, and I know even when at my previous employer, we debated on whether or not we should require background checks of an appraiser. I understand that the appraiser is going into people's homes, so we agree it's very important to know what the background of this appraiser is. Have they had any criminal background before? Because if they had, are you comfortable allowing them into a borrower's home? And certainly Allstate is a proponent of doing these background checks, but the problem comes is the background checks are expensive. So who's going to pay for this? If it's going to be the AMC, if the lenders want this pushed on the AMC, which maybe that's the case, that will be needed to be included in the pricing to the lender, or at the minimum passed on to the appraiser at the application stage if they want to join the panel. Or in my opinion, what seems more appropriate is it can be monitored by the state. So when an appraiser goes through all their education and signs up to be a licensed appraiser, at that point they have to do a background check, or maybe every 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever the state mandates, then another background check be done, and it can be part of the renewal application or the onboarding of a new appraiser. And again, this is something that the states could regulate and would be a lot easier. That way each AMC is not running their own background checks. It could be done by the state and mandated by the state and checked by the states. So again, more to come on that, I'm sure, as this year goes on. So moving on to our next slide here. Every AMC should have a vendor management team. Again, this is where it all starts at, so selecting that right appraiser. So if you're going to have a vendor management team, you have to start with a good vendor manager. And my suggestion would be any AMC that has a vendor manager should probably have one that has an appraisal background, probably a licensed or certified appraiser themselves that has extensive knowledge around use path and FIREA. Obviously, the lender is going to require that any appraisal delivered to them meets these qualifications and meets these guidelines. A vendor manager should not be afraid to pick up the phone and talk to the appraiser. Have a professional conversation. If they're getting ready to assign a complex property, maybe you want to pick up the phone and talk to the appraiser and see what their background is. Have they done complex properties? What's their familiarity with the market that they're getting ready to appraise? These are things that your vendor manager should be able to do. And I can tell you one thing, as an appraiser at one time, many years ago, and obviously working for a lender now, but when I talk to appraisers, they want to talk to other appraisers. They don't want to talk to somebody who's been trained to assign appraisals. If there's a question on their appraisal, somebody disputes an appraisal or has a question on how things are being done, they would love to talk to another appraiser who can talk to them. And then educate appraiser why the lender or AMC is calling. Again, there are many times when an AMC or lender requests an appraiser to ask for additional information. So it's nice to be able to pick up that phone and be able to educate the appraiser on why the lender or the AMC may be asking for something. Because sometimes the appraiser doesn't know. They just need to be educated. So moving on again. So now we get to, once you've decided, okay, how are we going to do this? Are we going to auto-assign? Are we going to have a system that auto-assigns? Or is it going to be more of a manual assign? I can tell you, based on what I've seen, most AMCs have a combination. So they have a technology that is good enough to rate appraisers and to locate appraisers within a certain vicinity and to determine that their fees and everything fit into the assignment. Again, the technology is an important piece, but the manual piece too, because everything can't be manually assigned or auto-assigned. It means picking up the phone, interviewing appraisers, like I said before, finding out what their expertise has been, finding out what their background's been in appraising certain properties. They have to be geographically competent. How many assignments in the area has the appraiser completed? Have they only done one? Or is this, or do your records show that they've done 50 or 100 over the last 6 months? Whatever that may be, your AMC should be tracking how many assignments each appraiser does in a particular area, and they should track by assignment type. So how many single families, how many multifamilies, how many condos, how many complex properties have they done? And then last but not least is proximity to the subject. And again, this by itself is not a sign that a particular appraiser is the best appraiser because he's closest, or that a particular appraiser may not be competent because they live 30 miles away. I know I lived in an area when I was doing appraisals where it's basically a 3-county area. And if you just only let me do appraisals in that one county, then I would be very limited. I actually lived in all 3 counties at one point in my time, and I was very competent to complete any assignment in any of those 3 counties. So location to the property is not the only judge, but it should be something that your vendor manager considers, but not by itself. And the one thing I can tell you is working from a lender, and I'm sure a lot of lenders on the phone right now, that as soon as an appraisal maybe comes in a little shorter, doesn't come at the value that the borrower or the loan officer expected, the first thing you may hear is, hey, this appraiser is not from the county, or this appraiser is not from the area. Again, so if you have a set of appraisers that, all things being equal, they provide the same quality, the same customer service, it might be best for that AMC to choose a closer appraiser, because it takes an argument off the table for the lender or the loan officer to have to explain. So, moving on, again, every AMC needs to also assignment competency, consider assignment competency, not just the geographic competency, but when you get into a rural market, obviously there may be fewer appraisers to choose from. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you've researched those appraisers that are available in that marketplace. You know, do they have access to the courthouse? Do they have the realtor relationships in the area? Because when you're in rural areas, it's the realtors typically that know everything that's going on, and/or the courthouses. Can they reach out to double check the county or the MLS data? Do they have somebody to do that? If you're looking at a customer high dollar property, you know, what's the appraiser's background? Has he done these before? Is his experience in custom materials and upgrades? Do they understand how the market reacts to them, or somebody in that price point, you know, what they would pay for certain items? These are very important when you're assigning an appraisal of a customer high dollar property, because it does take an expertise, and it does take time to develop the skills to do those type of appraisals. Again, your vendor management team should track a number of assignments. We talked about this before. Track the number of assignments that your appraiser's done for you, and the number of single families, the condos, the multifamilies, the custom homes. Again, because when an assignment comes up, you can look and you can see their track history and say, hey, yeah, this guy's done a ton of condos. He's done good quality. He's returned the appraisals within a reasonable SLA. He's provided good customer services. We haven't had any complaints on this appraiser. Then, hey, that's the person you want to use. So these are things that your vendor management team can certainly help and to identify the best appraiser to complete the assignment. And to be honest with you, these are things that your regulator, when they come to audit you, they're going to want to know, you know, how did the appraiser choose that? And we'll get into the audit here later on in the PowerPoint. Moving on, Steve. Again, even Fannie Mae, you know, talks about, you know, the selection of the appraiser. The appraiser must have the knowledge and expertise that is required to perform a professional quality appraisal. They go on to talk about geographic competency. Every appraiser should be competent to appraise in that market, and then they should also have the knowledge and access to the necessary and appropriate data sources for the area in which the assignment is located. Again, we talked about that. It just goes to show you that Fannie, Freddie, your regulators, they are also weighing in on these items now, so it's important that you as a lender require this of your AMC. A good scorecarding of appraisers, and again, what we'll highlight, and the scorecards can be very complex, and again, it's all about the technology. Every AMC I know has some technology that's going to be able to scorecard their appraisers. 3 of the things I noted here are the 3 most important things. You know, how is that appraiser's quality? Every time an appraisal comes in, when it's going through the review, and it's going to go through a couple stages of review. It's going to go through an automated review, and it's going to go through a personal review where somebody's actually picking the appraisal up, reading through it, making sure the photos make sense, making sure the report reads and makes sense. So that appraiser, how did they deal on quality? Did you have to go back for a lot of items? Did you continually have to go back to the same appraiser for the same things? Those are things that you're going to want to check, and you're going to want to have a technology that can score those. Second, and I know it's important to all you lenders, it's turn times. You know, how quickly is this appraiser getting it from the assignment? Are they scheduling the appointments quickly? Are they getting out and getting it turned around, getting into the AMC? The AMC is doing a review. If they've got to go back to if your AMC's got to go back to the appraiser, are they able to get those questions answered in a very quick fashion so that we can get that turned back to the lender? And then important is the customer service. And I've got horror stories I know over the last 15 years working on the lender side of some of the customer service stories that I've heard appraisers doing, you know, showing up in shorts and, you know, maybe not showing up on time, you know, coming without a pen or a camera, and just little simple things like that. You know, it's customer service. How do they talk to the realtors? How do they talk to the borrower? Those are all important things that need to be scorecarded. Anytime a complaint's filed with the AMC, they should be looking into it and doing their due diligence to find out if this complaint has merit. Moving on to the next slide. Again, this is very important. I can tell you every audit that I was on through the OCC or the feds, one of the questions that they have been asking recently is the exclusionary list. Not only is the lender maintaining an exclusionary list, but what about your AMC? Have you looked at them? Have they been performing their own exclusionary list that they have? An AMC is responsible for not only managing their own exclusionary list, but they also need to make sure that the AMC reviews each client's exclusionary list. Most AMCs work for multiple lenders, so that means not only do they have their own exclusionary list, they also have to consider each and every lender exclusionary list before they make that assignment. Again, that goes back to having a good vendor management team and a good vendor management manager. Just because an appraiser is on one lender's exclusionary list, and I want to make sure that this is clear, that it doesn't make that a bad appraiser. We don't know what the reasons why a particular lender placed an appraiser on the exclusionary list. However, it is something to take note in. But I would not, just because one lender has it, not used, because we could have a history with an appraiser who's done 100 assignments for us, and every one of those assignments had good quality, very good turn times, no other complaints. So just to label one appraiser and say, hey, because he's on one lender's exclusionary list doesn't mean that they're qualified for every lender's or that AMC's exclusionary list. So something to be careful with. Again, moving on to the next, monthly meetings. What they're going to want to ask you for is, can you show me details of the monthly meetings that were happening, not only at the lender, and again, you lenders should be also having your own internal exclusionary list and your own meetings, as well as your AMCs. And this is a group that reviews all the information and makes recommendations. There should be minutes to those meetings. They should be filed in a thing so when a regulator comes in, you can pull them out and show them, hey, yeah, this is the appraisers we talked about. Here's what we did, and then here was our final recommendation. Again, so we start out, once a complaint's been made, or once maybe we have some quality issues, what do? We notify the appraiser and say, hey, here's been issues with your appraisal, or here's some things that we found out, or here's the complaint that's been filed against you. Give them a chance to respond. Once you have all the information, again, that panel reviews it, or the team members review it, and they respond back to the appraiser. Let them know the recommendation. The recommendation can be one of many things. It can either be counseling or training. Maybe it's something very small that can be trained. Just because an appraiser makes a mistake, and we all make mistakes, a lot of times you can still counsel that or train that appraiser and turn them into a very good appraiser. So you don't want to just automatically put them on the exclusionary list. If they can be trained, train them. Sometimes you'll have written warnings that say, hey, you know what, this is your written warning the next time you're going on the E list. But maybe it's something even worse than that. Maybe it was a use pact violation or a fraud, or maybe even a customer service issue that was so bad that they get immediate placement on the exclusionary list. Again, those are all things that can happen out of those reviews by the board. And then the next thing, and very important, and I know when I was at my past employer, we were asked, how many appraisers did you turn into the state board? Did you turn in every use pact violation that had an impact on value? Did you turn fraudulent appraisers? And they're going to ask and want to see that documented. So make sure not only you are doing that, ask your AMCs. How many appraisers have they had issues with where they've found use pact for fraudulent appraisals, and what did they do? Did they report those appraisers as they're required to do by the regulators, or have they done that? Have they sent it to the state board and let the state board do their proper investigation? Moving on, and this is obviously with the third-party oversight, is anytime you use a third-party vendor, you're expected to do an audit. We, at my past employer, again, I keep going back to that, we did twice a year. We did every 6 months. We went to every AMC that we used. I would recommend at least doing it once, if not twice, but certainly once in order for you to meet the third-party oversight regulatory requirements. But go out there. What we did, and again, depending on how much you're using that AMC, what the volume is giving, we may go out with 100 files and see if you can move on to the next power or slide here. Basically, make sure they're doing what they're saying they're doing. So we would come out, we would tell them we're coming up, or we're coming out on X date. We'd show up with 100 files, and we'd sit in a room. We'd say, okay, let's see, what did you pay the appraiser? One of the things the lender is responsible for is to make sure that the AMC is paying a reasonable customary fee. With that being said, a lot of lenders have moved to establishing their own reasonable customary fees, something more cost plus. So they tell you what to pay the appraiser, and then they pay the AMCs for their services. that was not a very popular thing 3 years ago. It's becoming more and more popular because the CFPB is starting to come down on the lenders saying, hey, wait a minute, your appraiser didn't get paid fairly or didn't get paid a reasonable customary fee. And it's very difficult to determine when you're going into an AMC that doesn't have those required payments to go in there and say, okay, did they pay them a reasonable customary fee? But it is something that you're going to want to ask, and you're going to want to see if you have an AMC that's paying considerably lower than the rest of your AMC. So again, it's not going to be the AMC that gets in trouble here. I mean, they may get in trouble themselves, but the regulator, the lender, is going to come down on you. Another question you should ask is, how is the appraiser chosen? You know, like I said, every AMC that I've worked with or worked for now, they have technology that tracks the appraiser, and when you pull up an assignment, it pulls up a set of appraisers, and there's usually a score. Make the AMC show you. You know, why did you choose the fourth appraiser down on the list? Well, the first one was on vacation. The second one already had 4 assignments. You know, those are the questions you want to ask. You want to know, or this appraiser was the closest. He's had a very good score. You know, we're trying it out. Whatever it may be, make them tell you. And then very important is QC. A checklist not enough. Again, we start out, every way that I know, you start out with an automated checklist. Okay, something to check to make sure all the boxes are checked appropriately and making sure adjustments in the right way. But also, did somebody pick that appraisal up? Do they have reviewers, licensed reviewers on staff to look through that appraisal and to make sure it makes sense? Do the photos match? Did the comps did the appraiser write enough addendums to explain why a comp might be on the opposite side of a man-made border? You know, or maybe comps were 3 miles away, or maybe the subject property is a ranch and the appraiser is using 2 stories and split levels. You know, is there addendums in there with the appraiser explaining why they did what they did? This is a very important piece that an automation, while it's good to some aspects, you also need that licensed reviewer that can make sure, or at least a trained reviewer, that can make sure that what the appraiser is saying is in there and it's documented as to what they were doing and why they were doing it. And then every lender has their own specific items that they may want to be verified, and again, this can be something that's important to you that you may want to add to your audit checklist. After you get done with those, again, maybe 100 files is a good number that you go in and say, hey, let me see this, this, and this, things we just went over. But after you're done with that, see that the documentation that the AMCs are meeting state-specific AMC requirements. Right now, 39 states have their own the state-specific AMC requirements. Are your AMCs, when they're doing business in that state, are they doing it? It takes a full-time compliance director or manager right now. I'm sure there's 39 today. It's not going to be long before all 50 states have some sort of AMC requirement. And a lot of these things are getting very expensive for the AMCs. They are asking the AMCs, when they use a particular appraiser, they're asking so many of those assignments to be reviewed by another licensed appraiser within that state. So what we're having to do when we onboard an appraiser and he starts doing work for us, we're actually having to do a review of that work in order to stay compliant with the state. So make sure your AMCs are doing what they're supposed to be doing in order to stay compliant. And then at the end of your audit, you know, what are AMCs doing to keep up with the regulatory changes? As you guys know, it's one of the reasons we're having a call now. There's always something changing in this environment, whether it's from the Fed's regulations or state regulations. Make sure that the lender is being protected. Make sure the AMC knows what's going on and they're implementing any process or procedural changes that they need to make sure that the lender's protected. And then one thing that's very important now that I'm on this side of it, and even when I was on the other side, is have the discussion as what that AMC is doing. How are they doing against the other AMCs that a lender may be using? So most lenders use multiple AMCs. How do they rank against one another? What are they doing well? What are they doing not so good? You know, are they ranked first? And hey, it's a pat on the back. You guys are doing awesome. We can't ask you to do any more. Continue to do what you're doing. Or maybe they're the worst of your AMC, and you say, hey, you know what? All 3 of my other agencies are doing this, this, and this, and you guys are falling short. They need to know that in order to improve. But it's not a beat-up session. It's also a pat them on the back session. It should be something, hey, what's the good and what's the bad? Hopefully it's mostly good, but if not, you know, you want to address those items and have them fixed as quickly as possible. So that's it. I hope I didn't rush through that too fast, and I know we're pushing up against 30 minutes here, but we want to open up to some questions and answers.
Scott, thanks. And, you know, I want to reiterate to the callers that we conduct these webinars. It helps us stay sharp. We're rapid-firing information that many of you are familiar with on the surface. Some are very familiar with, but it's just a way of sharing some points that are pretty much the topics of the day. These are questions that we get from our clients almost every business day. How do you do this? How are you doing that? How should our other providers be doing the same types of things? So here are some questions that we just received that Scott, I'm going to address to you as opposed to answering myself. How many appraisers should an AMC have on their approved appraiser panel? I know that's kind of a broad question, but I think you have an opinion in that regard.
Yeah, Stephen, I don't think there's a right number there, to be honest with you. Again, it all depends on the market. You know, are you in an urban market like Cincinnati? You're probably going to have dozens of good appraisers in there that you're going to use, and you don't want to have too few. You don't want to have too many. Or if you're in a rural area, there may only be 2 or 3 appraisers even in that county. I'm from Kentucky. You know, we have counties with city populations of 150. There may be 1 appraiser in that area, and all the AMCs use the same appraiser. So there's really no correct answer on that, Steve. I wish there were a certain number. I would say whatever your AMC feels comfortable with, that they can turn out a quality appraisal within a reasonable time frame. And again, I can tell you there are dozens and dozens of good appraisals in urban markets, and most of your urban markets. There's a lot of good appraisers in your suburban markets, and there's a lot of good appraisals in rural markets. But again, it all depends on the market that you're in.
We often will see appraisers or other AMCs rather advertising that they have a panel of 10,000 approved appraisers or 15,000 approved appraisers. And I think that you know firsthand from when you managed AMCs working with a major national lender, that wasn't really always the case, because it takes time and it takes money to maintain an approved appraiser panel, to manage that panel. And I think that over time you found that those AMCs that suggested they were dealing with thousands of appraisers, 10,000, 15,000 appraisers, weren't necessarily truly vetting them in the same way that would be necessary today to be compliant. There weren't background checks. There isn't a scoring system. Would you agree that those firms that advertise, that every appraiser who's licensed in the country is available to work with them as an approved appraiser? That seems to be
Absolutely.
kind of disingenuous.
Yeah, absolutely. In the old days, when I say old days, a few years ago, it was good bragging rights to say we have 10,000 appraisers on their panel. I guarantee that they didn't vet their 10,000. They just signed up any appraiser that was out there. They probably only used a third of those appraisers, if that many. And then they had their go-to appraisers. And again, to advertise you have 10,000 appraisers, while that might be all good, it really shouldn't be something that a lender is considering as far as choosing an AMC.
Okay. Because there's been some well-publicized AMC failures in the past couple of years, and the possibility that there may be others that will not do as well this year because loan volumes remain somewhat depressed relative to maybe August of last year on forward, it's slower now. So there's a lot of AMCs of the 500 or so in business today that aren't as busy today relative to 1 year ago today. So the question is, from a lender's perspective, should the lender verify the financial strength of the AMCs it's considering utilizing?
Absolutely, because if an AMC that you use goes out of business and the appraiser doesn't get paid, the borrowers or the media, they're not coming after the AMC. All they know is that X lender didn't pay their appraiser. That's going to be the advertisement. It's a reputational risk at that point. So any AMC that you work for, you want to make sure they're a solid AMC. It's financially stable and can pay their bills. Obviously, like you said, things have slowed down, not only from the lender side. Obviously, that has rolled down to the AMC side. There's 500 plus AMCs out there, some big, some small, some medium-sized, and we've seen large AMCs go out of business. So just because they're large doesn't mean that they're financially stable. So it's definitely something that should be reviewed by the proper people at the lender to make sure that they're financially stable.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Is it important for an AMC to have more than one location, one physical location? So this is a question that I think deals with business continuity or disaster recovery. What is your position, having worked with the large lender previously? Did you look upon AMCs that have more than one location favorably, or did it not really matter?
No, we did. Actually, we required them to have multiple locations just in case something were to happen. You know, obviously you have a tornado or whatever it may be where one facility is knocked out. You want to make sure that they can continue to do business. They can continue to service their clients. I can't imagine in today's world that, you know, you're still doing business. So your AMC may be located in a different state or even across country for that matter. If something happens there, and God forbid anything horrific happens, but you want to make sure that business continues, and that means typically having multiple sites to make sure that they can continue to do business without any hiccups.
Okay. We have other questions. There was 7 other questions that I thought merited repeating that we'll put in a follow-up email that we always attach the webinar recording. So all those that called in today, we'll send you an email with the webinar recording as well as a list of the questions and the corresponding answers to those questions. Thanks for taking the time to listen to us today. Hope you took maybe a point or 2 away from this, and we'll look forward to talking with you again in the future. Thanks very much.